Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the ESS Harbinger. Through the large viewing window, he watched something that made his heart heavy. Another human colony ship was burning in the cold darkness of space. The bright orange flames looked beautiful from far away, but Jake knew what those flames meant. 3,000 people had just died. The ship that burned was called the New Hope. It carried families who were traveling to start a new life on a distant planet. There were children on that ship. There were old people who had saved their whole lives for this journey. There were young couples who dreamed of building homes under alien stars. Now they were all gone. "Sir, we have a message coming from Earth," said Lieutenant Amy Sullivan. She sat at the communications desk, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see the anger in her eyes. Amy had lost her brother in a similar attack just 2 months ago. The main screen flickered and showed Admiral Lisa Rodriguez. The Admiral looked tired. Her hair had more gray in it than Jake remembered, and there were new lines around her eyes. Leading humanity's space forces was not an easy job, especially when they kept losing people to alien attacks. "Commander Morrison," the Admiral said, "I need you to pick up Ambassador Peter Hayes and take him to Nexus Prime. The Galactic Council is meeting again." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "Admiral, how many more meetings are we going to have while they keep killing our people?" "As many as it takes, Commander. Earth's policy has not changed. We want peace through talking, not fighting." Jake wanted to say more, but he knew better. The Admiral was following orders from people much higher up than her. Earth's leaders believed that talking was better than fighting. They thought that if humans stayed peaceful, the other alien races would eventually leave them alone. What Jake did not know was that the Admiral was hiding something important. Earth's policy of appearing weak was not real. It was all an act. For many years, humans had pretended to be less advanced than they really were. They wanted other species to think humans were harmless and stupid. The truth was very different and very dangerous. 3 hours later, Ambassador Peter Hayes came aboard the Harbinger. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair at his temples. He wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic service. Hayes carried himself like a man who was very tired of his job. He had spent years watching alien politicians ignore human suffering while they argued about rules and procedures. "Commander," Hayes said as they shook hands, "I hope you understand how important this mission is. I understand that we're going to watch another group of aliens pretend they care while they do nothing to help us." Jake replied. He did not try to hide his anger. Hayes smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "Maybe, but sometimes the most important talks happen after the official meetings are over." Jake looked at the ambassador carefully. There was something different about Hayes today. Usually, the ambassador looked defeated before he even started. Today, he looked like a man who had a secret. The journey to Nexus Prime took 2 days. During that time, Jake learned more about the recent attacks on human ships and colonies. The aliens doing most of the attacking were called the Zelkari. They looked like giant insects with hard shells and sharp claws. The Zelkari had been attacking human settlements for months, always claiming that humans had entered their space illegally. But Jake knew that was not true. The human colonies that were being attacked had been approved by the Galactic Council years ago. The Council had said humans could live there. Now the same Council was doing nothing, while the Zelkari burned human ships and killed human families. Why? "Don't we fight back?" Jake asked Hayes during dinner on the second day. Hayes looked around carefully, making sure no one else could hear them. "What makes you think we're not fighting back?" "Because every time they attack us, we just file another complaint with the Council. We never shoot back. We never defend ourselves properly." Hayes cut his food slowly. "Commander, let me ask you something. If you were fighting an enemy who was much stronger than you, what would you do? I'd run away or surrender, Jake said. What? If running away was not an option? Jake thought about it. I guess I'd try to make them think I was weaker than I really was. Then I'd wait for the right moment to hit them when they weren't expecting it. Hayes nodded and took another bite of his food. He did not say anything else, but Jake understood. The ambassador had just told him something very important without actually saying it. That night, Jake lay in his bed thinking about the conversation. Was it possible that Earth was not as helpless as it seemed? Were the constant diplomatic meetings just a way to buy time? And if so, time for what? Jake thought about his ship, the Harbinger. It was supposed to be a simple escort vessel with basic weapons and shields. But Jake had noticed things about his ship that did not make sense. The engines were more powerful than they should be. The computers worked faster than similar models on other ships. The weapon systems had features that were not in any manual. When Jake asked the chief engineer about these things, the man just smiled and said, "Earth builds good ships, Commander." Now Jake wondered if there was more to that answer than he had realized. The next morning, they arrived at Nexus Prime. The planet was huge, covered in gleaming cities that reached up into the clouds. This was where representatives from all the major alien species came to make decisions that affected the entire galaxy. It was supposed to be a place where justice and fairness ruled. Jake had his doubts about that as the Harbinger approached the docking station. Jake received another message from Earth Command. Another human colony had been attacked. This time, it was a research station with 200 scientists. The Zelkari had given no warning. They had simply appeared and started shooting. Jake looked at Ambassador Hayes, who was reading the same report. The ambassador's face was calm, but his hands were gripping the data pads so tightly that his knuckles were white. "Ambassador," Jake said quietly, "how long are we going to let this continue?" Hayes looked up at him. For just a moment, Jake saw something dangerous flash in the older man's eyes. "Not much longer, Commander. Not much longer at all." The Galactic Council chambers were enormous. The ceiling stretched so high that Jake could barely see it. Hundreds of seats filled the circular room, each one designed for a different alien species. Some seats were built for creatures that looked like giant birds. Others were made for beings that seemed to be made of living crystal. A few were filled with water for species that breathed liquid instead of air. Ambassador Hayes walked toward the center of the room. His footsteps echoed in the huge space. Jake watched from the observation area where humans were allowed to sit. He counted at least 50 different alien species in the chamber. Most of them were not paying attention to the human ambassador. They were talking among themselves or looking at their electronic devices. The Zelkari delegation sat in a group near the front. There were 12 of them, each one looking like a giant insect with dark green shells and 4 arms. Their leader was named Keffer. He was bigger than the others, and his shell had patterns of gold and silver. Keffer was famous for hating humans. He thought humans were weak and stupid and should not be allowed to travel between stars. Next, to the Zelkari sat the Vorthan delegation. The Vorthans looked somewhat like humans, but they were taller and their skin was pale blue. They had been one of the first species to join the Galactic Council. The Vorthans thought they were better than everyone else because their civilization was older than most others. On the other side of the chamber sat the Crystalline Collective. These aliens looked like living gems. They were beautiful to look at, but they were also very cold. They made decisions based only on what would help them make more money. They did not care about right or wrong. At the front of the chamber sat Chairman Veltar. He belonged to a species called the Ethereals. They looked like they were made of glowing mist. The Ethereals were very old and very wise, but they moved slowly and took forever to make any decisions. Veltar had been the chairman for over 30 years. Ambassador Hayes reached the speaking platform in the center of the room. He activated the microphone, and his voice filled the chamber. "Honored members of the Council," Hayes said, "I come before you today to report another attack on human civilians. The Zelkari Empire has destroyed a research station with 200 innocent people." Some of the aliens in the chamber looked interested. Others continued to ignore him. Jake noticed that several delegations were not even in their seats. They had sent junior staff members instead of their real ambassadors. Cathver stood up before Hayes could continue speaking. His 4 arms moved as he talked, making clicking sounds with his claws. "The humans complain about every small fight," Cathver sighed. His voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. "Maybe if your species stayed in your tiny solar system, these unfortunate accidents would not happen." Many of the other aliens made sounds of agreement. The Vorthan ambassador nodded his blue head. Several smaller species that depended on Zelkari protection also showed their support. Hayes tried to continue. This was not a small fight or an accident. This was the murder of innocent researchers who were studying plant life on an uninhabited world. "Uninhabited by whom?" asked the Vorthan ambassador. His name was Thexander, and he spoke with a smooth, educated voice. "The Zelkari have ancient claims to that region of space. Perhaps humans should learn to ask permission before they settle on other people's worlds." Jake felt his hands turn into fists. The research station had been operating for 5 years. The Galactic Council had approved its location. There had been no Zelkari in that system when the humans arrived. Chairman Veltar raised one misty hand. "The chair recognizes that territorial disputes are unfortunate. However, the Zelkari Empire maintains that these were defensive actions." "Defensive?" Hayes stepped closer to the microphone. "They attacked a science station with no weapons. They killed researchers who were studying flowers." Cathver made the clicking sound that meant Zelkari laughter. "The strong survive, Ambassador. The weak become food. This is the natural way of things. Perhaps humanity should accept its place in the order of life." More aliens showed agreement. Jake saw representatives from at least 20 species nodding or making their own sounds of approval. Only a few seemed uncomfortable with what they were hearing. Hayes looked around the chamber. He saw faces that did not care about human suffering. Some species were too weak to help even if they wanted to. Others saw opportunity in humanity's problems. If humans were destroyed, their colonies and trade routes would be available for others to take. A few aliens genuinely felt sorry for humans, but they were afraid to speak up. The Zelkari were strong and had many allies. Anyone who defended humans might become the next target. "I see," Hayes said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pressed a button on a small device. The action looked casual, but Jake knew it was important. The message that went out was simple. It contained only 2 words: "Execute Prometheus." Across human space, people who had been waiting for years suddenly became very busy. Scientists in hidden laboratories began final preparations on projects that had been decades in the making. Engineers at secret factories started loading cargo ships with equipment that did not appear in any official records. Military officers who had been pretending to be clerks and teachers began putting on uniforms that no alien had ever seen. Hayes turned back to the microphone. "Very well. I understand the Council's position. Humanity will respond appropriately." Chairman Veltar looked confused. "Ambassador Hayes, this Council has not yet made any official decision. We must follow proper procedures." "Of course," Hayes said. "I understand completely. Humanity will wait for your official decision." But Jake could see that Hayes was lying. The ambassador was not going to wait for anything. Something had changed in the man's posture and voice. The tired, defeated diplomat was gone. In his place stood someone who looked dangerous. Cuthbert sensed the change too. His insect eyes focused on Hayes with new interest. You sound different. Human. Almost like you think you have some power in this matter. Hayes smiled. It was not a nice smile. Power is an interesting word, Cuthbert. It means different things to different people. Humans have no power, said Alexander. Your ships are slow and weak. Your weapons are primitive. Your soldiers run away from real fights. Is that what you think? Hayes asked. The chamber became quiet. Even aliens who had not been paying attention were now listening. There was something in the human ambassador's voice that made everyone nervous. Hayes looked directly at Cuthbert. Let me ask you something. In all your attacks on human ships and colonies, have you ever wondered why we never fight back properly? Because you cannot, Cuthbert replied. Because you are weak. Or, Hayes said softly, because we have been choosing not to. The chamber erupted in clicks, chirps, and other alien sounds of disbelief. Several representatives stood up to shout questions or insults. Chairman Veltar tried to restore order. Ambassador Hayes, if you have evidence of hidden human military capabilities, you must present it to this council immediately. Hayes looked around the chamber one more time. His eyes met Jake's for just a moment, and Jake saw something that made his heart race. The ambassador was not bluffing. Evidence will be provided, Hayes said calmly, when it becomes necessary. As he walked away from the speaking platform, Hayes activated his communication device again. This time the message was longer, but still simple. All units, begin Phase 2. Let them see what they have been missing. In star systems across the galaxy, things that had been hidden for decades began to reveal themselves. And the aliens who had spent so many years looking down on humanity were about to learn that they had made a terrible mistake. Dr. Corinne White looked like any other human scientist working on an alien world. She wore simple clothes and carried basic equipment. Her laboratory on the Vorthan homeworld was small and looked poorly funded. The Vorthan scientists who worked nearby often laughed at her outdated computers and simple tools. What they did not know was that Dr. White had 3 advanced degrees in biological warfare. She had been pretending to be a struggling researcher for 15 years. During that time, she had been studying every alien species in the galaxy. She knew their genetics, their weaknesses, and exactly how to hurt them without harming anyone else. Interesting, she said to herself as she worked. Her official research was about how humans adapt to alien environments. Her real work was much more dangerous. She was creating diseases that would only affect specific alien species. The Vorthans who laughed at her had no idea that she could kill their entire planet with a single test tube. Dr. White received Hayes' message while she was working late in her laboratory. The message was simple. Execute Prometheus. She had been waiting 15 years to hear those words. She opened a hidden panel in her desk and pulled out equipment that looked nothing like the simple tools the aliens had seen her use. Within minutes, she was preparing samples of a pathogen that would be deadly to Zelkari, but harmless to every other known species. On the other side of the galaxy, Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez was having a very different day. He worked on an industrial planet called Kepler 442b, supervising what appeared to be a simple mining operation. The local crystalline collective overseers thought the humans were just digging up basic materials for construction projects. They were wrong. Danny had been extracting rare metals and elements needed for advanced weapon systems. The primitive human drilling equipment was actually more sophisticated than anything the crystalline collective used. It could reach deeper, work faster, and extract materials with perfect precision. How is our timeline looking? Danny asked his assistant, Maria Santos. They spoke on a secure communication channel, that no alien technology could detect. The orbital platforms will be ready for deployment within 6 hours, Maria replied. It is amazing what you can accomplish when everyone thinks you are too stupid to build anything dangerous. The orbital platforms were not construction equipment. They were weapons that could destroy entire fleets of alien ships. The materials Danny had been mining for years were now being assembled into devices that would change the balance of power in the galaxy dot back on Earth. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez stood in a room that officially did not exist. The facility was buried 3 kilometers underground beneath the Rocky Mountains. If anyone asked, there was nothing there except old mining tunnels. In reality, it was the command center for humanity's most secret military programs. "Report," Admiral Rodriguez said to her staff. Colonel Ben Hughes stepped forward. He looked tired but determined. "All assets are in position, Admiral. The Zelkari just attacked another civilian ship. The merchant vessel New Dawn. 800 people died this time. Any survivors?" 17. They were rescued by what the Zelkari think was a patrol ship that got lucky. Admiral Rodriguez nodded. The lucky patrol ship was actually the ESS Phantom, one of humanity's most advanced vessels. It was equipped with stealth technology that made it completely invisible to alien sensors. The Phantom had been watching the attack from the beginning, recording everything and waiting to rescue any survivors. "Admiral," Hughes continued, "we are also getting reports that other species are starting to test our defenses. The Vorthan hegemony just took over a human research station. They claim we violated some old treaty. The Crystalline Collective is demanding money from our outer colonies." "Of course they are," the Admiral said quietly. "They smell weakness." She activated the room's main display screen. It showed a map of known space with red markers indicating hostile actions against humans. There were dozens of red markers, spreading across the galaxy like a disease. Admiral Rodriguez had been preparing for this day for 30 years. She had joined Earth's military as a young officer when first contact was made with alien species. Back then, everyone thought the aliens would be friendly and helpful. They were wrong. The aliens saw humans as primitive and weak. They took human colonies, enslaved human workers, and killed human families whenever it was convenient. Earth's government tried diplomacy, but the aliens just laughed. They tried trade agreements, but the aliens cheated and stole. Finally, Earth's leaders made a difficult decision. If the aliens thought humans were weak, then humans would appear weak. But while they appeared weak, they would secretly become strong, very strong. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication station. "We have a priority message from Ambassador Hayes." Hayes appeared on the main screen. He was still in his quarters aboard the Harbinger, but he looked different. The tired diplomat was gone. In his place was a man who looked ready for war. "Admiral, the council meeting went exactly as we expected. Complete indifference. Active hostility. Several species are already discussing how to divide up human territory once we are extinct." "Understood, Ambassador. Are you ready to deliver our response?" Hayes smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a real smile. "I have been ready for a very long time, Admiral." All across the galaxy, humans who had been pretending to be harmless suddenly stopped pretending. Scientists like Dr. White activated biological weapons that had been years in the making. Engineers like Danny Rodriguez began deploying orbital weapons platforms that appeared out of nowhere. Military officers who had been disguised as clerks and teachers put on uniforms and took command of ships that no alien had ever seen before. The plan had taken decades to prepare. Thousands of humans had spent their entire adult lives pretending to be something they were not. They had endured insults, attacks, and humiliation while they waited for this moment. Dr. White finished preparing her biological weapon and loaded it into a delivery system that looked like a harmless weather monitoring. satellite. Within hours, it would be in orbit around the Zelkari homeworld. The aliens would never see it coming. Danny Rodriguez watched as his mining equipment transformed into launch platforms. Dozens of orbital weapon systems rose from hidden silos and began moving toward their targets. The crystalline collective overseers were too busy counting their money to notice that their world was about to become very dangerous dot in the command center on Earth. Admiral Rodriguez looked at reports coming in from across human space. Every secret base was activating. Every hidden weapon was powering up. Every disguised agent was revealing their true purpose. "Admiral," Colonel Hughes said, "all units report ready. We can begin the demonstration whenever you give the order." "Admiral." Rodriguez thought about all the humans who had died while they prepared for this moment. She thought about the families burned alive in their ships. She thought about the children who would never grow up because aliens thought humans were weak. "Begin the demonstration," she said. Across the galaxy, alien worlds suddenly found themselves facing problems they had never imagined. Zelkari military bases lost power as their own computers turned against them. Vorthan battleships discovered that their navigation systems were routing them into dangerous asteroid fields. Crystalline collective trade stations found their financial networks completely compromised. And in the depths of space, sleek human warships began appearing where no human ships were supposed to exist. They made no hostile moves. They simply revealed themselves like a message written in the stars. The message was simple. Humanity was done being the victim. The aliens who had spent so many years laughing at human weakness were about to learn what human strength really looked like. And they were going to learn it very quickly. The Second Galactic Council meeting was very different from the first one. Word about increased attacks on human colonies had spread throughout the galaxy. Many alien representatives came to the meeting expecting to discuss how to divide up human territory after humanity was destroyed. The Zelkari delegation was especially confident. They had received reports that human military responses were becoming weaker and more desperate. Ambassador Hayes entered the chamber with a completely different attitude. Gone was the tired, begging diplomat who had pleaded for help just days before. In his place walked a man who carried himself like someone who held all the cards in a deadly game. Jake Morrison watched from the observation area and immediately noticed the change. Hayes walked with purpose. His shoulders were straight. His eyes were alert and focused. He looked like a predator who had finally decided to stop hiding. "Honored council members," Hayes began, his voice carrying clearly through the enormous chamber. "I come before you today not to ask for help, but to give you information." Kethver's mandibles clicked with amusement. The Zelkari leader was enjoying himself. He thought he was about to watch the final surrender of the human species. "Information about what? Human?" Kethver asked. "About your species giving up?" "About your mistake," Hayes replied calmly. Hayes activated a holographic projector that he had brought with him. The center of the chamber filled with a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red lights showed recent attacks on human positions. But now blue lights appeared as well, scattered throughout alien space like stars. For the past 73 years, since first contact, humanity has maintained a policy of appearing weak. We have seemed technologically inferior, militarily, incompetent, and diplomatically helpless. This was intentional. A wave of surprised sounds swept through the assembled delegates. Species that had been chatting among themselves suddenly paid attention. "In that time, we have placed assets throughout your territories. Researchers who seem to struggle with basic concepts while actually mapping your genetic weaknesses. Engineers whose primitive equipment serves purposes you never suspected. Diplomats who appear naive while cataloging your military capabilities and strategic vulnerabilities." The holographic display zoomed in on specific star systems, showing detailed intelligence networks that had been operating undetected for decades. Every major alien world had blue dots scattered across its surface. Chairman Veltar's ethereal form shimmered with what might have been alarm. "You speak of espionage, Ambassador. This is hardly unprecedented in galactic politics." "This is not espionage," Hayes interrupted. "This is preparation." The display changed again. Now it showed real-time footage from across the galaxy. On Zelkari, worlds, massive orbital defense platforms, were simply disappearing. The huge structures that had protected Zelkari space for centuries were breaking apart and falling into planetary atmospheres like burning meteors. On Vorthan worlds, military installations found their power grids failing as their own technology turned against them. Battleships that had been docked for maintenance discovered that their engines would not start and their weapons would not fire. Crystalline collective hive ships, the mobile cities where their species lived and worked, suddenly found their navigation. Systems routing them directly into dangerous nebulae and asteroid fields. Their trade networks crashed as financial records vanished from their computers. "What you see is humanity's actual technological capability," Hayes continued as shocked silence filled the chamber. "Stealth technology that renders our vessels invisible to your sensors. Cyber warfare systems that can turn your own networks against you. Weapons that can dismantle your most powerful defenses without leaving evidence of how it was accomplished." The aliens in the chamber stared at the displays in disbelief. Some representatives were frantically trying to contact their homeworlds. Others sat frozen in their seats, unable to process what they were seeing. Kethfer rose from his seat. His forearms trembled with rage, and his shell turned a darker shade of green. "Impossible. Humans are primitives. Your technology is centuries behind ours." "Our technology," Hayes said quietly, "is approximately 400 years ahead of anything currently used by any member species of this council." Hayes gestured, and the display showed detailed blueprints of human military vessels. They were sleek, predatory shapes that looked nothing like the bulky, slow ships humanity had been pretending to use. The designs showed capabilities that defied known physics. "The vessels you have been destroying were obsolete civilian transports we allowed you to target. Our actual military fleet has been watching, recording, and learning from every engagement. We know exactly how your weapons work, how your shields function, and how your tactics operate." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted accusations, demands, and threats in dozens of different alien languages. Some species called for immediate military action against humanity. Others demanded proof that the displays were real. Few quietly began calculating how quickly they could withdraw their forces from human space. Through it all, Ambassador Hayes stood calmly at the center podium, waiting for the storm to subside. Jake noticed that the ambassador looked almost relaxed, like a man who had finally been allowed to tell the truth after years of lying. Chairman Veltar used his authority to restore order, but his ethereal voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. "Ambassador Hayes, if what you claim is true, why reveal this now? Why maintain this deception for so long?" "Because," Hayes replied, "we hoped it would not be necessary. Humanity genuinely sought peaceful coexistence. We wanted to find our place in the galactic community without resorting to the methods that had served us so well during our violent history on Earth." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the chamber. "But you have made coexistence impossible. You mistake restraint for weakness. You interpret mercy as vulnerability. You have responded to our attempts at diplomacy with genocide." The display showed a final image that made every alien in the chamber gasp. It was Earth itself, but not as they had ever seen it. Gone were the primitive cities and obvious industrial installations that alien visitors had been allowed to observe. Instead, The planet revealed its true nature. Earth was a fortress world. Orbital defense networks that seemed to bend space around them protected every approach. Fleets of vessels that defied known physics hung in perfect formation around the planet. Energy shields covered the entire world in layers of protection that no known weapon could penetrate. So we stopped pretending, Hayes continued. Effective immediately, any attack on human civilians, any seizure of human territory, any attempt to subjugate human colonies will be met with proportional response. You threaten the entire council? Cuthbert snarled, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. No, Hayes replied. We warn you, there is a very important difference. Admiral Rodriguez appeared via holographic projection beside the ambassador. She wore a military uniform that no alien had ever seen before, decorated with symbols of rank and achievement that spoke of a long and successful career. This is Admiral Rodriguez, commander of Earth's defense forces, she said. To demonstrate our sincerity, we are returning all seized human territories as of this moment. We are also providing humanitarian aid to evacuate civilians from Zelkari, worlds that may experience environmental difficulties in the coming days. Environmental difficulties? Chairman Veltar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Corinne White's research has proven quite fruitful, Hayes explained. Within 72 hours, every Zelkari world will experience an outbreak of what appears to be a naturally occurring pathogen. It will be completely harmless to every other species, but universally fatal to Zelkari physiology unless treated with a compound that only we can produce. The Zelkari delegation exploded in outrage, but their angry sounds seemed hollow and desperate rather than threatening. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Every alien representative sat frozen in their seats, staring at the holographic displays that showed human capabilities they had never imagined. The silence stretched for several minutes before Chairman Veltar finally found his voice. Ambassador Hayes, the ethereal leader said slowly, if what you claim is true, why reveal this now? Why not simply destroy us if you have such power? Hayes looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces. Some showed fear. Others showed anger. A few showed what might have been respect. Most just looked confused and lost. Because destruction was never our goal, Hayes replied. Humanity spent thousands of years fighting itself on Earth. We learned that victory through violence always comes with a terrible price. We hoped that other species had learned the same lesson. He gestured to the displays showing the ongoing effects of human retaliation across the galaxy. We wanted to be part of something better. A galactic community where different species could work together, trade together, and explore the universe together. We were willing to appear weak if it meant avoiding the wars that had scarred our homeworld. Ambassador Hayes walked closer to the Zelkari delegation. Kethver backed away from the human, his four arms moving nervously. But you taught us that our hopes were foolish, Hayes continued. You showed us that in this galaxy, mercy is seen as weakness, restraint is seen as cowardice. Peaceful intentions are seen as opportunities for exploitation. The holographic display changed to show a timeline of attacks on human settlements. Hundreds of red markers appeared, each one representing lives lost to alien aggression. For 73 years, we have absorbed these losses. We buried our children, mourned our scientists, and honored our explorers while we waited for you to realize that cooperation was better than conquest. We were wrong to wait so long. Hayes turned to address the entire chamber. Today, that patience ends. From this moment forward, humanity will defend itself with the same efficiency we have applied to everything else. Any species that attacks human civilians will face immediate and proportional response. Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward in her holographic projection. To demonstrate our capabilities and our resolve, we will now provide a small preview of what resistance to these new policies will bring. The main display showed a Zelkari military base on the edge of their territory. It was one of their strongest fortifications, protected by energy shields and defended by hundreds of warships. As the council watched, the base simply vanished. One moment it was there, the next moment there was only empty space. That facility housed approximately 10,000 military personnel. Admiral Rodriguez said calmly. They were evacuated to nearby planets 60 seconds before the base was destroyed. No lives were lost, but the message should be clear. Gasps and worried sounds filled the chamber. Several smaller species began frantically messaging their homeworlds. Keffer rose unsteadily to his feet. You cannot do this. The Council will not allow. The Council, Hayes interrupted, has had 73 years to prevent this. You have consistently chosen to ignore human suffering while debating procedures and protocols. Your permission is no longer required. Hayes activated his personal communicator. Dr. White, please provide your status report. Dr. Karen White appeared as a hologram beside the ambassador. She looked nothing like the struggling scientist she had pretended to be. Her equipment was clearly advanced, and her laboratory was obviously sophisticated. Ambassador, the pathogen has been successfully deployed to all major Zelkari worlds. Infection will begin within 6 hours. The disease will be fatal within 72 hours unless treated with the antidote we have developed. The Zelkari delegation erupted in panic. Several representatives collapsed as the full implications hit them. However, Dr. White continued, we are prepared to provide the antidote and full medical support to any Zelkari world that withdraws its forces from human space and returns all captured human civilians. Hayes turned to the Crystalline Collective. Delegation. Chief Engineer Rodriguez, please report on the status of collective trade networks. Danny Rodriguez appeared as another hologram. Ambassador, we have successfully taken control of all major collective financial systems. Their trade operations are currently suspended. We estimate their economy will collapse within 1 week unless their systems are restored. The crystalline beings in the chamber began vibrating with what Jake recognized as their version of extreme distress. Of course, Rodriguez added, we will restore their systems immediately upon the return of all human territories and the payment of reparations for damages to human colonies. Hayes looked at the Vorthan delegation. As for the Vorthan hegemony, I believe you will find your military capabilities somewhat reduced until you withdraw from the research station you recently seized. Reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Vorthan battleships found themselves completely powerless, drifting helplessly in space. Their orbital platforms had shut down. Their communication networks were jammed. In less than an hour, one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces had been rendered completely helpless. Chairman Beltar raised a trembling ethereal hand. Ambassador Hayes, what you are describing is not diplomacy. This is conquest. No, Hayes replied firmly. Conquest would involve taking your territory, enslaving your people, and forcing you to serve human interests. We have no desire to rule anyone. We simply want to be left alone to pursue our own destiny among the stars. He gestured to the displays showing human ships appearing throughout the galaxy. These vessels will remain in their current positions until all human civilians are returned safely and all attacks on human territory cease. They will not fire unless fired upon. They will not invade unless invaded, but they will be watching. Ambassador. Hayes looked directly at each major delegation in turn. This is humanity's final diplomatic message. We tried cooperation, and you responded with violence. We tried negotiation, and you responded with contempt. We tried patience, and you responded with genocide. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the most arrogant species could see that the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted dramatically. From this day forward, any attack on human civilians will result in the complete destruction of the attacking force. Any attempt to enslave human colonies will result in the liberation of those colonies and the punishment of those responsible. Any effort to treat humanity as inferior will be met with a demonstration of exactly how superior we have become. Hayes began walking toward the exit. You have 48 hours to comply with our demands. After that time, we will assume that any species that has not withdrawn from human space has chosen to be our enemy. As he reached the chamber doors, Hayes turned back one final time. For 73 years, humanity has been the galaxy's most patient species. We absorbed your attacks, ignored your insults, and endured your violence in the hope that wisdom would eventually prevail. That hope is now dead. The doors closed behind him, leaving the Galactic Council in stunned silence. Outside the chamber, Jake Morrison waited with a shuttle to take the ambassador back to the Harbinger. As they lifted off from Nexus Prime, Jake could see alien ships frantically departing for their homeworlds. "Sir," Jake said, "what happens now?" Hayes looked out at the stars and smiled. "Now, Commander, we find out whether the galaxy is capable of learning from its mistakes. And if it is not, we teach it some new lessons about the price of underestimating humanity." The age of human weakness was over. What came next would depend entirely on how quickly the galaxy adapted to this new reality.